I have no idea if I can explain this, but going through last couple of days especially and reflecting back my life, the journey, the persons I met, books I read, and then reviewing some of the things I summarized on the web. There was a time when I used the GeoCities and I went back to those archives and then found that it's a special site that I summarized my thought at the time. This is 2010, so 11 years ago. And I came back to the same conclusion, and I was actually quite impressed the way I summarized. And rereading that, I don't think I can rephrase in any way, and even if I could, it may not be able to be, uh, it's not easy to communicate. But still, I want to capture this for the sake of my confirmation and the approaches I'm taking in relation to the spiritual journey, if you call that, where lots of wisdoms or the compassion are found. And but I want to try a few things at least. Number one, little history. Um, just reflecting back my younger days, I was interested in religion perhaps because my grandmother was a little bit concerned about death, and she mentioned or dreamed in the middle of the night. So as a little boy, I felt something. When I was 18 or 17, I read Pascal's Pensées, thought pieces, and found that what's the point of life? He made a very interesting case, and as a young person, I got struck, and it was like a darkness I found. I didn't know what to do. I went into Zen, but also interested in pursuit of my career from work. Um, I spent time off, yet I started to keep on studying uh, Zen, especially. When I went to Stanford and about to graduate, I found Daisetsu Suzuki's book. That was when I was about 30, and that made me to went back to Daisetsu, especially. And when I realized I read pretty much all of his, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 books, all of um, the volume, which may add up to maybe 4 feet. And it was difficult to understand and don't comprehend easily, but something attracted me, especially his personality and the people's comment on him. And he was a humble person and dedicated his life to basically communicate Zen into the West as much as also to share the thought in Japanese, especially toward the end of his life. I met Okamura, Michiko-san, who spent time with the Daisetsu toward the last 15 years of his life, and those are the events that happened and influenced me a bit. I went to Vipassana and had many spiritual experiences and continued. And then the summary I mentioned about 10 years ago, I put onto the website and I revisited that because going through some of the ups and downs and reflection of the life, nothing unusual. It's just the way it is that when the situation changed and I change and the new situation pop up and you go through some difficulties, that's natural to live a life. If it's everything is too peaceful, uh, that may not be as interesting as I felt at one point in my life that I wanted to go to hell. Funny expression, but too peaceful, too complacent didn't make sense, and wanted to discover more about the world, which end up in spending another 8 years, 10 years from about 2010, including my divorce, that I wanted to go into that direction. And then many things happen, and the deepening of my spiritual understanding or application of those ideas, techniques, and principles. I kept up going through that, and every now and then I summarize the thought and share it with people and post it on the YouTube, or in this case, homepages at the GeoCities, and that's all in archives, unfortunately in Japanese. But that's the point I came back to, as I said earlier, that all reflection of my life, and at age 73, and I came back to the same point. What is that same point I mentioned? And I said it's difficult, even if I can use words to convey the uh, real experiential sense. Is difficult to communicate. I think of the Kierkegaard, who said something like a subjectivity is truth, or truth is subjectivity, that it may be found in each person, what that is, but because of the subjective experience and experiential issues that it's unique to that person, to communicate that it's not easy. As much as Lao Tzu in Tao Te Ching talked about. Recently, Eckhart Tolle talks about the same situation, except his way of communication is very deep and capture the essences that I also have studied from different religions, from Buddhism and Christian and Sufism and Hindu and others too, even to the religion in Israel or other religions that I can think of. But the bottom line of those summaries 10 years ago point the sentence of thy will be done. At the end, everything is a manifestation of the law of the universe, and it goes on every single moment. As Eckhart Tolle talked about the power of now, it is that moment when things happen, and if we can be as it is at each moment, then we may find the way. And our way is not the notion of our way, because truthfulness considered or captured in the mind may not directly relate to how the universe is processing everything at the moment. Because mind create hypotheses, good and bad, and analyze it or evaluate. And that's a human creation. And that's what Wu Wei, the word no action, in Taoism talk about. The nature's way is Wu Wei. And the human way is not the nature's way, because we have the artificial construct of the logic and the words and so forth and manipulate that to describe it. So it's not the truth of what it is, but just the interpretation from the mind. As much as I remember Picasso talking about the painting is a light to bring out the truth. The words can't possibly bring out the truth, but by itself, as we use our mind, often it is not as much of the truth. And therefore the delusion and the ego and all that pops up, and then we find ourselves struggling in it and causing the suffering. And the religion or spiritual pursuit is to help us to realize that the truth out of the fakeness or dream-like mind play of what's going on. As I mentioned about two universes, the mind has its own constraint, and we manipulate within that constraint, the using of the word and conceptual discussion and doing this and that. That has benefit for human, not just as animals or the plant, because of the use of that artificial, construct of the logic and the law that we may find. We can sort of manipulate better the situation so that we evolve in certain way. But the evolution needs to be connected to the way of nature, the law of nature, and therefore when that happens, things moves fine. But if we are off from the truth or nature's way and caught up in the artificial mind, then we lose track of what's the reality, what is the whole point of our existence, from the way that is prevailing as truth, let's say from the God point of view or from the universe point of view as it is, we detach ourselves from that. And that often create, because of the detachment and bringing the identity of self, for example, or ego, that create the difficulty because you're off from the principle way of how the universe is prevailing its force and the law that is creating this whole event from moment to moment. So again, I'm using those conceptual discussion, logics and so forth to communicate. But if we can do that with the mind more aligned to the truthful way, then we may be not so much of like playing with ego or imagining something fake or dreamlike away from the reality. But since we have that faculty of the mind, we can also connect the possibilities, finding the suffering of abusing it, and then abusing or misusing of that mind potential, and then the suffering is to be realized and awakened so that we can readjust to the way of nature or thy will. There's will of the nature prevailing, and therefore the word thy will be done is ultimately the way it is, no matter what human mind can think about. So that's the kind of a way I was talking in that summary note 10 years ago. Thy will be done is the ending part of that realization I had. And with that, I felt convinced that I know something about the principle. But again, the danger that I thought I knew, or I think I know, that is again the mind state statement of something. And as soon as you start to think that is the answer, you're creating the answer in the mind, whereas you may be, or I may be detaching myself from the way of the universe, how it's prevailing from the moment to moment. And as soon as I start to do that, like I understand, and then the environment changed, my situation changed, and more accumulated experience bring in another idea of this and that, and that may bring me a moment where I'm shaken because you don't know everything. You're just managing in the area of where you can, and if the environment changes, you may lose the ground. So you have to go back to the basis, and basically that's what happened by me rediscovering my note of 10 years ago and coming to the realization I was feeling like that time I thought I got it, but I got lost in the process of the changes and the challenges and interest of various things I had to explore life. Then I have to go back to that basic point. The subjectivity, truth, the experiential wisdom that I gain can be fading away over time, and you just can't let that happen. To make sure that you have a better understanding of how to navigate your life. So, in summary of the summary of what happened of the reflection and rediscovering some of the note that I had 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, is to reconfirm the foundation and the principle. And if I can capture the principle or the wisdom and the feeling I had, although I have been capturing as I went through, over many videos to identify the wisdom in each of the steps, but then I recapture the whole of that process related to that note that I had 10 years ago. So, what does that mean? To me, what I have been capturing every step of the way and sharing in various YouTube videos are all valid points. I don't think there's a great mistakes when I was talking about, for example, calm and quiet mind. or Shila Samadhi Panya, the process of doing the right conduct and have a calm and quiet mind and coming up with a wisdom, or all the steps that I shared in monitoring, blank dot exercise, life profile, and various ideas that I shared. Those are important elements for me to sort of synthesize the whole, and that has been going on. And because of this last few days and reflection and coming up to the certain realization reading this note, it makes sense in terms of the wisdom and compassion, but still I have to keep working as a living being, incomplete, always in the process of evolution, and practice all of the elements that I have. But one of the key areas that I want to emphasize is this, which is very simple. The practice is a moment-to-moment practice. Capture every time that any delusionary thought pops up. That's when I am to execute the wisdom that I have been trying to capture. I've been doing it daily or monthly or life profile every 3 months, and synthesizing ideas posted from the various voice memo or YouTube, and building up, so to speak, of the way that I would approach life, looking at the situation from various point of view, synthesizing all of those into the practice. So the bottom line of it is the moment-to-moment practice, and how can I do it more to catch the moment of my coming into delusionary thought or beginning of the suffering. That is exactly the moment I want to put my energy or awareness functioning. And how do I do that? That is the very point. And Hakim mentioned about the meditation is good, but it's in the control setting. So that how to control, practice the idea in a dynamic setting, that is happening in life, which is basically catch the moment of my beginning of the thought or the delusion, which is going nowhere, but kind of sidetracking from the main course of life. That's when I need to catch. And the way to do that, to me, is building up this awareness, and awareness executed at the time. So that building up is one, but having a point and execute that. And that point is exactly what I need to focus more and more, so that I may not spend delusionary thought and dipping myself in it too long, but rather at the beginning of it, before it gets too much or to the left or right, not into the center, middle way. That's when I need to catch. How do I do that? Just catch it. So in essence, there is that willpower needed to capture, if we look at this human construct in terms of intellect, emotion, and willpower, which I may have shared some time ago. I know I have shared. The mind-related issue may be a wisdom, and the emotion-related issue may be a compassion, and the willpower may be the will of the universe, or thy will that I was talking about. So that thy will need to intervene, and by capturing the moment and put in practice, so that you don't go further into the delusion, but eliminate that possibility. So it's a dynamic process of the process control, if you want to use that term, and it has to happen like that. And how do we do that? And that's where I realized that I need to put more emphasis to catch as early as possible and use the willpower, sort of like coming from the belly, which I talked about, the willpower and the belly issues in the previous videos, and just practice it. And more you do it, you learn the timing and you gain the knowledge and the wisdom that you could do it, and therefore you build up the sort of like a neural network related to the core of our being, the root of our being, essence of our being, the life energy prevailing as a way of the universe prevailing us to live. And that's the connection of the willpower, the energy, into the level of the brain. I talk about use the brain, listen to your heart, and the heart has a source of the energy that prevails, and the brain may be a little bit detached from that, but we need to keep connecting the brain and the heart. That's what I mentioned in the books I wrote, and also Dalai Lama mentioned for his foreword that he gave me to my book, Result from the Heart. Use the brain, but at the same time, use your heart. Listen to your heart. And again, how to do that requires the willpower. Let that come out immediately, which means you need to be attentive to what's going on. How can you be attentive? Again, we need to have a mind calm and quiet and emptying it where possible. Therefore, you can see the movement much more clearly. If we get tangled up, it's more difficult. So meditation would help that in the control setting, but in a dynamic setting, we have to practice it, and that can be done. In case of one of the friends that I communicated, Michio, mentioned that it's about the Nembutsu, or the chanting, or the Namu Amida Butsu is the Japanese word. It may be a prayer. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's grabbing the moment and then realize the power of Bodhisattva, the God, whatever, law of nature, to prevail. And we can do it by having our calm and quiet mind develop and be attentive to it. And with the passion or the energy to cut that delusion. In Zen, it's called makumoso, which means the maku is the cut. Moso is delusion. So you cut the delusion. Or Shin Buddhism, I mentioned about the prayer or Namu Amida Butsu. It's the same energy that you are bringing in at the moment when the delusion rises. So last thing I can perhaps talk about is this, that there is a saying from the certain sutra which says, use the delusion as the firewood and utilize the wisdom as the fire. And with this idea, you can find the nirvana or enlightenment or peace and happiness, as if that is the food that you can gain from that process. So the bottom line is that practice, practice, practice. Simple. And the point is that this is for individual to do it, only with its own devotion, initiative, belief, faith, and continued practice. We can walk the path better and better, even though the whole situation changes and we can change. But if we have those principles laid out, understood, and repeatedly practiced, the repetition is the mother of skill. And the skill in this case is not our skill, but the thy will take care of us, because we'll be aligned to the way of the universe that functions. And there we can find the happiness, the peace. And that's what we do to live our life over and over. Of course, we make mistakes. Of course, Bono or the delusion will pop up. But we'll find a way. Or say it differently, we, or with the help of, if you call God, or nature's way, or the principle of how the universe functions, we'll find a way. Thank you.